It's a cold night, and thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming. I'm Ruby Yang, and really welcome all of you here. And this is our third year of our master classes, and we really honor this time is all women. And it's actually, men are welcome, of course.
A round of applause, please.
You're going to be clapping all night long.
And I'm really interested in, of course, we're really honored to have really great filmmakers here, my colleague, Nancy. And we really, really want to talk about our journey. How did we start? How come we got into this crazy business? Slaving away in our editing room, slaving away behind the camera. And so I think we should just, go with Kirsten. Shall you begin?
Well, Martin beautifully introduced me, and some of you were here for the screening of Camera Person, and I did a master class with several of you, and so that this journey that took me to Senegal because I was inspired by the filmmaking of Ousmane Sembène and Djibril Diop Mambéty because they sort of opened my mind to another world, then led me to Paris, where someone was very wise to say, you'll never get into the directing department. The French ego will not support an American getting into the directing department. It was true, right? And so I went into the cinematography department, and I'm forever grateful for that because I really fell in love with working with the camera. I'd like to just give a shout out to our fabulous camera people here who all happen to be women. I lived in Paris for 7 years and started working on documentaries there, and then moved to New York, where I've had the pleasure of working with some really extraordinary filmmakers, and many of whom, I would say, were women. Many of my jobs have been given to me by women. But I am very honored to be here, and I will certainly tell you more about my journey later, but that's enough about my journey for now.
Mary, yes, very proud, and you're born in Hong Kong, as many people here, and we want to know about your journey.
Mm-hmm. It is quite. There are overlapping places with Kirsten, which is funny. Well, I was born in Hong Kong, as many of you know, raised in Hong Kong, and then went to Canada, where I went to Loyola Concordia for communication arts. And because in Hong Kong there was the film club in City Hall at the time, and the 中國學生週報, Chinese Student Weekly, that introduced me already to French New Wave films. So all through my teenage, the dream was to go to Paris to be with François Truffaut. And as usual, as Canadian Chinese parents would do in Montreal, they wanted me to study commerce or something like that, and so I went into mathematics. And then when I graduated, in fact, the first thing I did was to enroll in exchange program with the University of Wisconsin to go to Paris for a year, where I quickly found out that it wasn't about filmmaking. It was about film, but it wasn't about filmmaking, film production. It was about semiology. And so I dropped out with some friends, and we put our money together to make my first film. But during that time, I had to get a budget going, and one of the classes we were allowed to take in any French university to sit in was Eric Romer's class. And so I went to his office to get a budget and befriended him. And the rest is kind of history. So I started making my own films, and then when I was broke and wanted to stay in Paris, he hired me as Cécile de Gougy's assistant editor. Cécile was his editor at the time, and he asked whether I would consider working as her assistant when I had already directed my own films. And when I found out that she edited Breathless, I said I would sweep the floor for her. So that's how it started. And then I started to work on his other films. And many years later, when Cecile retired, I became his chief editor. And then when he started to make like less films when he got on in age, I started to work with independent filmmakers in Asia, a lot in Asia and so on. And one of the things that I did want to add is that I continue making my own films. So one of them was a film in West Africa. Yes, that I went, because I also made a film on the South African writer, Brayton Breitenbach, and he had this initiative on Gorée Island. So we went on this poetry caravan from Gorée to Timbuktu 2-3 times, yes.
Oh, you're so lucky you went to Timbuktu. The river was too dry. We couldn't make it to Timbuktu. No boats were going.
Oh, wow. Well, we'll have lots of stories to tell together. That's it.
That's great. Nancy.
My story is very short. I studied.
Turn on your microphone.
Went to film school in Canada at York University, studied film, and couldn't find a job. 1970s, they wouldn't hire a woman nor a Chinese. So I came back to Hong Kong, worked on television, worked at TVB, did a little few documentaries, and then I kind of, Hong Kong's too small. So I left and went to New York and started doing, it was beginning of cable TV, so we start raising money, and we have our first Cantonese language nightly news and entertainment channel in New York in 1982. And then after that, I left, and then with a few friends, we started making independent documentary films, and that's it. And then in 1999, I came to Hong Kong, and I was invited to go and teach at City University. They just started a new School of Creative Media, and I did that for a few years, but I really miss making films. So 2007, I quit full-time and went back to New York and did films, and then Hong Kong, you said, well, can you come? I said, I don't do full-time, half-time maybe, so I'm teaching here only the spring semester. So that's my story.
Great, thank you. Well, I make my story very short. So I was born in Hong Kong and went to San Francisco and studied painting. And then somehow got into film, making very experimental film. My hero was Stan Brakhage, James Broughton, all those very, really nobody heard about them except people want to, do experimental film. My Darren, I love that kind of experimental film. And so I actually met Lambert there. He actually introduced me to independent filmmaking. And then make several short films and find it very interesting. And actually I find the canvas is so huge, it's better than painting. And then I start interning with Wing Wang, and he was then making Dim Sum, his second feature film. They need someone who speaks Cantonese. And I happened to work in that post-production house, and that's how I started. And then I pick up editing, and also then start editing documentary for a long time, and while support my own documentary films, and edit a lot of films about Chinese American history. And actually, when you come from Hong Kong, when you arrive in the U.S., you feel like, wow, no longer, black hair, different, people always ask you, where do you come from? Where, that question. And then I also discovered the injustice about the Chinese American that faced Exclusion Act for a long time. There was a lot of lonely men in San Francisco all by themselves in the park because they were bachelor. They came from the bachelor society. So I got very interested in the Chinese American story, and then that's how my film was a lot of it about racism and advocacy. And so in 2004, my husband and I, Lambert, moved to China and stayed there almost for 8 years doing advocacy work on HIV/AIDS. And then the Beijing weather got too bad. I can't stand it anymore. So I was very lucky. Former director of JMSC said, "Oh, do you want to come to Hong Kong?" I said, "Yes." So got on a plane. And very lucky to be teaching with Nancy. So and then started the Hong Kong Documentary Initiative 3 years ago. Hopefully there will be more people, interested in documentary.
Okay. Well, I'm curious. I thought that maybe I'll ask a question, but we talked about a question earlier, but I forgot what it is already. So I'm going to ask another one.
Movie.
Huh?
Gangster
movie. Yeah.
We thought this whole panel would be a lot more exciting if it was gangsters in cinema.
Gangsters, yeah.
But then we thought about the ways in which we have had to be gangsters in our career to make it. So
Maybe we can talk about, is there any time in our career that we thought that it's too difficult? Maybe we should do something else. Had it ever entered your mind? That film is just so difficult.
Actually, not at all. For me, has always been somehow like the experience of seeing this extraordinary thing on the screen, and then somehow you find a way to enter the world of making it. Has always felt like, it's kind of a magical experience that I want to continue to be part of. But it's not like I haven't had some hard moments, but I definitely, I've never imagined quitting.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't think I've ever imagined quitting, but I never imagined getting into it.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is that I think one of the things that you said, that, knowing somebody who was actually, that was how I felt when I met Cécile, of course.
I'm sure.
Go down breathless. Who? Yeah. What?
That's
really?
crazy.
Somebody
Yeah.
got it, But the thing is that, and then of course I look back, I remember seeing a yearbook from my Montreal high school graduation, and I just read ambition to be a movie director or something, to be doing movies. And then the kids in my class wrote, most likely what you end up with is showing home movies to her grandchildren, which is what I'm doing now.
Wow.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
But one of the things that maybe that I can share is that my father, who was a businessman, my parents were both business people in Hong Kong, but their hobby in their late 50s, early 60s, this is a particular time of Hong Kong society when people were getting more wealthy by the boom in construction after the war. And so my parents were like right in there in the building business. And so they started to have this, what people nowadays would play with cars and things, buy cars and stuff. And he started buying movie equipment.
Oh.
So I grew up with 16mm, with Bolex cameras and stuff, and little blocks of editing block with glue and stuff. So actually, I inherited his Bolex and his whole and he had a projector, and we used to project. They bought little reels of 8mm films and 16mm films that you can buy in the store. So we grew up in an environment of film that is now unthinkable. But now I suppose that everybody shoots video of their kids, and it's the same thing. So getting. I mean, for me, it's always been bathed in that environment. But whether I ever thought of quitting, I think that I never really even realized that I was in it. In terms of that, throughout many years, because I was also raising my kids, I couldn't live just by working in editing. So I had a parallel life of working at many odd jobs and UNESCO, and doing one of the oddest and craziest thing was doing a translation interpreting thing gig one night at the SM club. Yes. Someone just called it, do you want to do this? Yeah, sure. How much does it pay?
You know all the terminology then, huh?
Of course. Yeah, that kind of thing. So yeah, but no, never thought of quitting because I never thought that I was in it.
Well, at that time when, in the 80s, when I graduated, very few Asian American, very few Asian in the field. And it's like, especially in San Francisco, there's no movie industry. So basically all documentaries. And it's hard to find a job because you are, you're new immigrant. So luckily, within the art world, people don't have that much prejudice. I think, a lot of people just, with a handful of people who are Asian American who can work in film. And I think when I first got my big feature film job, and the producer actually asked me, what do you feel, you're Chinese? How can you edit American story? I actually got that. And I said, well, movies, love stories, universal. I have no problem, So, I mean, people do have preconceived idea about judging your ability. So a lot of time is that you have to, work harder, double, just prove yourself, you just being able. I think that's make me even want to do it more because I don't want to quit. So, I would stay in the editing room, I would stay longer than everybody. I would try double hard as everybody to really do an excellent job. I think that's the way to fight it. Yeah.
Do you have other questions, maybe?
Well, I think it's kind of boring to sit on the stage and it's like talk about stuff and it's going, I think we should open to the floor and then we can probably, interact with people.
Why don't we join you all, right? Can we do that? Do you mind if we sit with you? Yeah?
We want to be...
There's a question.
Yes.
All right.
All right.
We'll be moving
Let's go.
around.
All right, let's go.
Yes.
All right.
So here, yes? Hi, how are you?
They're getting scared already.
We're getting lots of feedback going.
Okay.
I'm going to sit here.
I'm here.
Yes. I like your haircut.
Nowadays, so many people have access to, digital media. And how have you seen, like in the films that you see now, do you see changes? And what do you think about how that's changing cinema? And does it change the way that you think about cinema that, maybe you have more access to? Like, do you use more lo-fi digital tools like now? Or do you try to stay, in using the best equipment possible all the time to kind of, create a different kind of cinema to what we see all the time?
Is it always what the budget allows? Yeah, I mean, Kirsten, maybe you're the person to answer this question. Kirsten?
I'm right over here.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Well, I mean, I think it's sort of what's the aspiration of each different movie. Like, sort of what does the story need? And so, I've worked for all kinds of different filmmakers who worked on all kinds of different scales of film. I feel like we're absolutely in a time where more people than ever feel empowered to make things. The question is, who's going to see them? Are they going to sort of acquire the status as filmmakers to be able to get budgets and move forward? And you know, I do think that we are in this space where you could say, okay, the Hong Kong documentary industry doesn't exist yet, and like, can I make a film? And yet, if you made a film that was relevant, we were just talking with Adrian, who's a filmmaker here, like, if you made a film that was relevant to Field of Vision, which is a program of short films based in the United States, you could make a film and it could be screened internationally. And it's sort of, for me, I think there's a collapsing in some ways of the local distribution market, but an expansion of this sort of global distribution. But you have to think of yourself as a local community of filmmakers. And I don't think that trying to make films alone is a path that makes sense at this moment in history. I think making films collaboratively feels really important to what I've done in my career, sort of no matter what the format. And there's so much more pleasure in that. Making films together and then also sort of pushing each other back and forth around what works and what doesn't work. So I feel like in a certain way, it's this time where it's easy to feel like, oh, I can make something, but no one will ever see it. But you actually do have the chance to have your work seen internationally, but you've got to start looking at international work and looking at the language of cinema that's happening and raising your bar by looking at the work that other people are doing and not count yourself out. Be like, I'm a player, basically. One of my students at NYU was this, young Chinese woman named Nanfu Wang who made a film on her summer vacation. I thought it was really good. Yeah, Hooligan Sparrow, right?
Yeah, Hooligan Sparrow.
It's a fantastic film. And she, it was her school project, and she made it. And I thought, wow, it's really good. Let's submit it to some festivals. We submitted it. It didn't get in. And then she worked on it for another year just with this small bit of footage and made a great film. It made it to the Oscar shortlist. And she's a young woman, her first film, and it was her first student film, right? But sort of thinking of yourself as someone who can exist in a way that's relevant to the world, I think is a really interesting place to be.
In 2007, 2008, I took up a project where I went to Pakistan, to Iran, to Jakarta, and also in China to teach Muslim women how to make documentary films. And it's a really amazing experience. We didn't have fancy equipment. We basically have little camcorders. And we started from there. And the films that they made, eventually they were put on the internet. They all start, creating sites for the internet. And I think 2010, when Iran had a movement, and all the people who I taught had to leave because they couldn't stay in Iran anymore. They would be arrested. So they are now in London, in Germany, in Norway, and one is in Brooklyn. And they continue to make short films about their lives and about their life in exile and put it on the internet. So, equipment is actually cheaper, and now we can use it on the iPhone. It's always the message and what is it that you want to say. Who is your community? Who are your audience, right? So, Ruby, you want to add something?
Yes. When I returned to Hong Kong, I make a film called My Voice, My Life, and I actually used the high school student to help me make the film, and they, of course, now high school have they have TV crew, or they have a cinema club. So is that young people already know how to use camera, and it's about ideas. It's what they want to shoot, and if it's actually they help me a lot because young people think differently. As a filmmaker, you want to have themes, you want to have very logical ideas, but young people might not have logical ideas, but they but they have they do on instincts, and it's very fresh. So I would actually, and then I put their footage in the film, and it's very fresh and surprising. So I think is young people are so much savvy with their equipment now, and shooting with GoPro or iPhone, whatever, is what you want to say, like Nancy said.
I absolutely agree. It's I mean, in terms of editing, it's quite often people ask, what kind of software and stuff. I always say that it's like really not important. I'm not here to teach you guys how to use Final Cut or Premiere. You can edit on your phone, you can edit it with iMovie, you can edit on anything. It's like, I actually encourage iPhone. Yes, this is a horror story to Kirsten.
No, I'm all for it.
Yes, and that and to just do it, put it out, think about what you want to say, and do it in your own way. But there is a logic. There's a sort of a way to put together what you want to say. That is what you have to search for. But other than that, the equipment is not important, I think.
Hello. I'm wondering, you just spoke about the technology and dissemination, but on the more on streaming services like Netflix, how do you see them changing the documentary landscape, including the types of content that we're seeing?
Kirsten?
Oh, sorry, I was so excited to be sitting next to the person that I'm sitting. We were getting to know each other because she hosted Laura Poitras when she came and showed her films.
Wow.
Somebody else answer, because I missed the question. This is what happens when you let people go into the audience. They talk to audience members.
The question is, how had Netflix documentary changing the landscape of documentary?
Ooh, yeah, I actually can speak to that. I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years, so there's like these waves that come and go, where suddenly someone new enters the landscape and they're going to change documentary production and distribution for all time, and then 2 years later the company doesn't exist anymore. And so there are a lot of us who are just like, you live through it, and you continue to make your work sort of regardless of who shows up to. 1 year they're spending a huge amount of money on documentaries, and the next year, this year at Sundance, Netflix didn't buy any films. Last year they were buying films for $800,000, $2 million. This year they literally did not buy any films. And, it's interesting. Netflix is not revealing to filmmakers who watches the films, how many people have watched it. They acquire your film, and it goes into that void that we're aware of, where you can't necessarily search by filmmaker. You can search by category. And they don't want people to do theatrical releases. And so there's a way in which they're trying to be a monopoly force. And then there's also a way in which they are putting a huge amount of money into the field and fully financing films. And so that's sort of exciting. For a long time it was only HBO that would do that. And then HBO started saying, go ahead, make your whole film and then show it to us and see if we like it, right? But I think there are a couple of things. I feel like in general, documentary isn't really an industry. it is made up of a lot of filmmakers who have some means of support, because you can't predict how long it will take to make a film. You can't predict if the film will be any good. And you can't predict if the world will be interested in seeing it by the time you finish it, right? It's really an awesome, it's like a series of variables that are always out of your hands. And so to a great extent, it's you as a person. Can you find a way? Do you want to stay committed? And then you may or may not get lucky at the year that you finish your film, whether it gets picked for a festival. And, the life of the festivals is this very strange thing. But if you get taken by one festival, then suddenly you're a darling and you go around to all the festivals. But if you miss out, or you premiere at the wrong one, then no one has ever heard of you. There's sort of a lot of false moves you can make, and to succeed, you have to be really lucky. So, I feel like it's exciting in certain ways that Netflix has arrived and is bringing lots of money. I don't know how long they will be putting money into documentary film. A lot of documentarians are, we're noticing, but we're not saying, oh, try to jump on that boat, because you don't know if that boat's going to even still be supporting documentaries in a couple of years, because they're finding that making fiction series is the way for them to have the press that they want. So, I think for me, it's funny to me how long it took me to understand how many filmmakers had money, right? Because I shoot for people and I'd work on films and be like, wow, how is this person working for 3, 4, 6 years on a project and they keep going, but they don't have any money? A lot of people have money. And so like, if you don't have money and you want to be in the documentary film world, you have to have some skills to be able to sustain yourself over time. And you have to be willing to, have your film enter the world and not get bought and not get distributed, and then you self-distribute. And, so there's a way in which it's so wildly unpredictable that you can't count on it the financial part of it you can't count on. What you can count on is it'll be an extraordinarily interesting life, and that you will collaborate with the most interesting and generous people possible, and you will love your life. All of those things I say you can count on, but Netflix, I don't know if you'll be able to count on.
I think crowdfunding also have been quite a source of income in recent years. But the problem with crowdfunding is that, yes, you have the money, you can raise the money to make your film, but that doesn't help you find your audience or distribute the film. You still have to find a channel, a platform to show your documentary film. Right? Mm-hmm.
But I think that there's something that you said, Kirsten, that really rings a bell here that I really strongly advocate or want to talk about, is that you can't, not only that you can't really predict how many years it would take you to make that film. I think there's a real danger and a real unfortunate trend of, whether in fiction or documentary, of filmmakers, young filmmakers who are going out to make award-winning films, or making films with some festivals in mind, and like you said, that you can miss that date, or that it's taking a few months more, and that you miss that round, and then you miss the whole system. Now I think that it's getting much more a system than 30 years ago. I mean that the same films make that 1 year the rounds of festivals, the same films go around, and if you miss that, you miss that. And I think that I really want to stress that, like Netflix and everything else, that all those funding systems and the funding organizations very good, but and the festivals and so on, and that there's so many mentorship programs and so on now. But don't get too much into a system. We have the danger of now being a system, and try to be independent again, try to have this independent spirit again, just go and do this film without thinking the festival behind it, the award behind it, and all this system that goes with it.
If you're doing it in a calculating way, in a certain way, like, you will create a nightmare film, because you will finish it too quickly. You will attempt to know things you can't know. But I think, like, we're here talking about like being women in cinema. In a certain way, you have to think about and understand what are the odds that are against you. And if you're trying to make something deeply unconventional, then how to do that. So I think you do have to think strategically. How am I going to survive? How am I going to make a living? How am I going to make the best film possible? What's the timing for when I want it to happen? But it's sort of keeping those things in sort of almost separate categories in your mind, so that you free yourself to make the project that you really want to make and to follow the story wherever it ends up taking you. But then you're not a fool and you premiere it at the wrong moment, or wait, then you just wait for the next year to come around or whatever, right? But like, so that you're both thinking strategically and in this completely loose, open-minded way that allows you to make a truly original film.
I think we in Canada, in New York, I think we kind of took it for granted that for us independent filmmakers, we can do freelance work, right? I can be an associate producer, I can co-produce others' film, and I make a bit of income. Maybe I work 4 months a year, and then the rest of the time I make my own films. I don't know whether you can do that in France.
We have an even better system.
Yeah?
I mean, in
Oh,
France,
good.
it's extremely spoiled because we can maybe that's what the French exception is, that we can work certain amount of hours per year, and that entitles us to make our own projects for the rest of the year while getting some sort of unemployment.
Oh, so we should all move to France.
No, you can all go to France.
Yeah.
But this is why this is important. That's why sometimes when the French complain, I say to them, "You don't know how lucky you are." In terms of, but this is the principle behind it is that for them, culture and art and so on is important. It's a very important part of life. So it's as important as making business and studying medicine. So that's why they do this. But then it's like it's true. It's an incredibly fortunate system.
But they still have some work to do on letting non-French people make movies.
Yes, that's true. But I am a non-French person.
Right.
I mean, I'm not a French national. I'm a
Right.
French resident. So I pay taxes, but I can't vote.
Yeah.
But that comes to actually a sidebar that actually we can also talk about is that in terms of the non-French person making films, as long as you're a resident, you can get all the help that you can get, but that there is something in France in terms of it's very much behind in their diversity thing, in terms of that. For example, I think we were talking about when we were having dinner that this whole diversity push. Whenever I've been in France like 40 years, but whenever I go to some sort of big thing at the Cinémathèque Française, one time I went with my daughter, and then cocktail opening and stuff. And I was saying to her, look around you, how many non-whites are there? We are the only two. And she said, no, Mom, look, there's another non-white person, the black guy who's serving this champagne. That was like a commonplace, just even this is like a few years ago. It's very shocking to me.
Well, I will share a story with you from just last year. I was at the Sarajevo Film Festival, and I met this woman who was sort of tall like me. I'm totally gonna move because my neck is like gonna break in this position. But so I met this woman, and she was tall like me, and she wasn't like chic French woman, and she had a feature film at the festival, and the first thought in my mind, excuse my French, was, they fucking let you make a film. And I was like, and it was like this internal thought of like, I can't believe this woman got to make a film. And I was like, whoa, where did that come from in me? Because I had gone to film school in France, and but I had gotten this really clear message 20 years ago that I didn't have a shot in the world as a sort of, big gangly American woman of making a feature film in France. And so I thought, at a certain point I thought, like, let me just like tell this woman that I had that thought, and see what it means to her at this moment. And she got all teary and she said, nobody let me make a film. I'm 55 years old. I don't have children. I've produced the films of a lot of people. I'm married to a famous French film director, and nobody ever thought I could be a director. And she said, nobody let me. And I was like, oh, it's 2016, right? So I do think that like there are ways in which we're hanging tenaciously onto this idea of like, who's a director? What does a director look like? Where does he come from, right? Khan keeps doing this over and over and over again. And like we're in this moment that's supposedly this moment where things are breaking free, and in some ways, like they really are, they're really shifting, but I think a lot of us remain deeply skeptical because we thought 25 years ago, like, didn't we live through a moment like this 25 years ago, Mary?
I lived through a moment like this 40 years ago.
Yeah,
Yes.
totally.
Yeah.
Some of my favorite people are raising their hands, so I'm gonna give them microphones.
I'll pass it to him afterwards. Can all of you guys share with us a few of your favorite films, maybe one that changed your life and one recently?
You start, Kirsten.
I'm not starting, I've been talking too much.
Okay, I watched Rashomon when I was 14 years old in Hong Kong. And I saw that film, I said, the film doesn't have an ending. At the end of the film, you don't know who's telling the truth. Maybe the truth didn't matter. So I said, if people can make a film like that, I want to make films. So that's what inspired me to make films, to go into film school. So now somebody else.
Okay, I earlier talked about STEM bracket, so I wasn't, I'm an accidental filmmaker. So I was just in this San Francisco Art Institute being very cool, and they all showing really all kinds of experimental film. I saw STEM bracket, moth, like the moth. So he just shooting with his Bolex, just the light, the moths and the light, and it's a film. And so I said, wow, I can do that. So that's I love those short experimental films.
Well, maybe I can. Well, I was going to say Hiroshima, Mon Amour, but I could actually think back a little bit more. It would more like Meshes of an Afternoon by Maya Deren, which was like really, really mind blowing for me. And it's still, I still show it to my students. Yeah.
Well, I was raised Seventh-day Adventist, and we weren't supposed to watch movies. So I didn't get to go see movies in the theater until at some point, I don't know what got into him, and I'm going to have to ask him, but my dad took me to see Young Frankenstein in the movie theater. And I was just like, the same kind of like, you could do this? You could make these kind of jokes. And so Young Frankenstein was thrilling. And the other thing that he sort of snuck me out to was a series at the University of Australian Films. I think he must have convinced my mom it was educational. And I saw Picnic at Hanging Rock and The Chant of Jimmy Blacksmith. And we even started to watch the original Mad Max, but then he was like, I got to get you out of here. So there was something illicit for me in cinema always that was really thrilling. Like I wasn't supposed to be there, and then people would say things on screen they weren't supposed to say, so that was really exciting.
I wanted to talk about story and how, like, I feel like in narrative films, of course, you build the story and the characters and the structure, but then in real life, some characters are more fascinating because they're real. And I wonder if, as a documentarian, you go out there with the ideas of story and narrative and character, and if you sort of plan that, or if you design it in editing, if it's part of the process.
Wow, that's a complex question.
I was going to wait for you to say whether you planned that first before I say on the editing point of view whether
I think in looking, it's usually every film is different. In some film, you meet a person you interviewed, and you know that you can build that story around that person because the story is so impactful and can represent what is it that you want to say. And sometimes you think that it works out, or you really want to communicate with this person, but then during the interview, it doesn't come through. So there are many variations. I don't really have kind of an answer to that. A lot of it is how do you communicate, and how do you see that final project, and usually it's not just one person, it's several characters or several persons that can make a story. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if I answer your question, but anyway.
well, actually I think about this question, and there is an interesting an interesting demonstration of an answer to your question is a film whose director is sitting here right now, Jessie Jung. This woman here. And I cut her Flowing Stories some years ago, which was when she started this project. It was about this village in her area in Hong Kong, and it was about this family whose children have mostly moved away, and so she actually followed them. She shot overseas. She shot the family, the children in England and in France and so on. And she came back, and I got on board, and I started to look at the material together, and realized that there was this grandmother who was left behind in the village, which had a little bit of an interview with her. And then I realized that there was some footage of this grandmother singing sango, this kind of a non-melodic kind of poetry songs back and forth in those days. And this old lady had raised her 6 children by herself, and that her husband went away to work in England and would come back once every 10 years and make another kid and then leave again. And she's still there, very strong woman. And so we shifted the whole thing. I mean, the thing is that I said to Jessie, well, how about you know, I mean, in my heart, I feel that this old lady should be the main character. So basically, we shifted the whole story, and that the tree, the big trunk of the tree became this grandmother, and it's the branches that are the children, and that it's really the story of the village and the grandmother. So that comes to sort of answer your question in terms of that maybe this thing starts with, because in fact it goes even further back, because the film started as when Jessie made her last drama film, the narrative film. The film ended, it was a fiction film, but the film ended in some documentary footage of a village festival once every 10 years in this village. And so when she decided to make a documentary, it was from this footage of the village festival. And at that time, we didn't have the main characters. We only had this village festival footage. And it was only when we decided which characters were going to be the story that we went back to the village festival footage to look for everything with that family in it and build the story then that way.
I mean, from the point of view of the camera person, you know, I've worked on films where we've shot 3,000 hours of footage and made an hour-and-a-half long film. I've worked on films where we've shot 9 hours of footage and made an hour-and-a-half long film, and sort of everything in between. And you go in with a whole set of ideas and hopes, and you think you know which stories you're following. But I think, like Mary's saying, you get into the edit room and footage speaks. Some footage speaks and other footage doesn't speak. And some people force that and stick with the thing they thought the movie was about. And other people construct entire new movies out of the footage. And I think there are many ways. A narrative is one strategy for making a film. There are all kinds of ways to pull people forward in a film. And a story is one way of organizing footage. And I sort of, what I love is that I have one experience filming and a set of conversations with the director and stories I think we're following and people I think we're following. And a lot of times I won't be consulted and I'll go into the theater and see this whole other movie, which sometimes makes me cry because whole other movies that I have shot don't exist. But I think that's one of the joys of documentary is that you're constantly shaping and imagining it into being and then also responding to what it is. So hopefully it looks like nothing no one has ever seen before. That's sort of the interest of it, but that's why it can take so long, because you're really building things out of material that either speaks or doesn't speak.
Okay, I got a question here. I have to look this way because my next. Almost forgot. The question, I want to ask this question that might bring us back to the theme tonight, Women Make Docs, which is, what's your take on this identity, women filmmaker, or do you just prefer to be known as a filmmaker? Yes, thank you.
Well,
I'm curious about why you care about that.
This is why I'm here tonight. I was attracted to this term.
I guess when I first started to make film, I didn't consider a female filmmaker or not. I just want to be an artist. So it doesn't matter really. I think there are people who want to be always pioneer, want to be the first, and there's always ceiling. You can't break that. There are certain ways. There's certain society gives certain rules that you can't break. So I think for women, there's so few I say role model, or so few people who are doing that thing, directing documentary or directing feature film or being a camera person. So you don't have anyone to look up to or say, where are my role models. So, and I guess that way you just have to make your own set of rules. Say, wow, this is what I want to do. I want to be an editor. I want to be, I guess, the best I can do with my job. I just see myself as doing my best work as much as possible, right? Kirsten?
Well, I mean, one of the things that's happened to me, like I went to film school, I studied cinematography, and then every day when I was out shooting, someone would accidentally call me a cameraman. And then people would sort of stumble and so that when it came time to make the film that I made about, sort of what is the work of being the person behind the camera, and we were searching for the title, all of a sudden I was like, camera person, like that's it, that's the title. And I went, the film went to this big cinematography festival in Poland called Camera Image, and at the beginning of the awards ceremony, they kept saying cameraman, cameraman, and it was all these really great, huge, these sort of monsters of cinematography, all the greatest people that I've always admired. And at a certain point, one of them sort of stumbled and said, camera person. And then from then on in the award ceremony, everyone was stumbling and trying to correct themselves and saying cameraman and camera person. And it was so exciting because, it's probably like 5,000 people there. They were mostly all men. And they were all tripping over whether they should call themselves cameramen or camera people. And I just loved that moment. But, for me, I've been introduced into the American Society of Cinematographers, and there are 4% of women there and barely any documentarians. And on a certain level, like, I know I'm a token. Like, I know they want me because I'm a woman, because they don't really take documentarians. And I feel like there's this terrible gap between the way documentaries are recognized and scripted films are recognized. So it was sort of fun to push against that boundary too and say, actually documentary cinematographers are doing really interesting, difficult work, even though we're not lighting every scene necessarily. To do observational work is really demanding work and needs to be respected in the way, filming scripted material is. But I remember quite clearly being on the stage with Laura for the premiere of Citizen 4, and there was this journalist who got up and said, Laura is one of the greatest women filmmakers. And I was just like, are you kidding me? Like, she's a great filmmaker. So I go back and forth. I have all kinds of feelings about these things where sometimes it feels like you're being put in a ghetto, and then other times it feels like, recognize the fact that there are very few women doing this work, and somehow we're here and doing it. So, I think it's a moving target at all times, basically.
When I as I said, graduated from film school, couldn't find a work in Canada, so I came to Hong Kong. And Hong Kong at that time, television, they needed people. So I got a job in making documentaries, and I worked with, other, and my boss is a woman. So it was great. And then when I went to New York, for a few years, I was line producing Hong Kong feature films for Stanley Kwan, for, other filmmaker films for the Hong Kong market, but on Hong Kong people's experience or Chinese people's experience in New York. And I kind of think there's no way that I could direct a film in as a woman. I mean, a feature film, because in the 80s it was so difficult even for anyone to get money to make a film. So then I decided, okay, I'm going to go into documentary film, and then I think there are more opportunities in documentary films for women to direct and to produce. So that's how I eventually start doing that. Yeah.
Well, for me, I never really, not in the same situation in terms of editors. There are a lot of women editors. So I think the question for me was rather, how did I, Chinese from Hong Kong, Canadian, educated, ended up in France being one of the most celebrated French masters film editor, which is a mystery that even today I can't answer. The only thing that I would say is it's something. I mean, I could say it like Kirsten in terms of that, but not in terms of whether in terms of a woman filmmaker, but in terms of a Chinese whatever filmmaker. That not to sell yourself short. I mean, not. I say that because I hear a lot sometimes from students that, oh, I can't do that because they would never let me because I'm a woman, because I'm Chinese, because I'm from Hong Kong, because I'm everything, because I'm gay, because I'm whatever. I mean, don't ever say that.
Yeah, I mean, that was what was so surprising to me, was that I had internalized that voice somewhere, like even, sort of me who believes myself to have been sort of moving ever towards what I hoped for, to encounter this woman in Sarajevo, 25 years after I left France, and hear myself say, like, wow, they let you do it? I was like, whoa. But I think, Nancy, that thing of like, there's a way in which we were being rational, right? They weren't gonna let you direct a feature film. But how do you push through those moments and become the person who does the thing that's never happened before? I think it's a really interesting problem to figure out, because I think there are roles in which whoever they are, feel comfortable with us, right? Whoever we are, but I think it's like staying really connected and grounded to what do you want? What are you trying to do? What can only you do? And I think in certain ways, like that's the impetus for making a film. Like what are you, you're the only person who can express this thing, to get that deep into what your identity is, in all of its complexity, and be the only one who can express this thing.
I think there's a question over there.
Yeah, hi. I understand that making a documentary would take like a long period of time, and the point is, if, for example, if you're pursuing a story and that would take maybe 5, 6, 10 years, and by the end of that time, things might have changed, and like especially in this time of the day when like opinions change every second, like events like there are changes every week, every month. And so how do you make your story and your documentary relevant to like maybe the audience that you want them to see?
And whether your target audience kind of changes as you make the documentary and as the times change, kind of thing.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, that's very tough. I think if you find a very compelling subject, your character, that he or she has very interesting thing to say, or people, and that's a theme that people can identify. It would not go out of fashion. Of course, with a political situation, in 3 years things change so quickly. But when you start to make the film, you have to decide, is this a film for the moment, or you're addressing that you can look back as in history. So those are decisions you pretty much have to decide when you start the project. You know that you're going to follow this person for 8 years. So what is the story? What's this journey? What is his or her journey going to be?
Yeah, in documentary film, there's a term we use, we call the shelf life of the film. So it's different than news, because news is like, okay, you cover the news today, or even, the news is relevant for 2018 for for the winter. But in documentary films, we want to kind of look deeper into what are some of the more universal themes that are relevant to humanity, that doesn't necessarily is a short span of time. And as what Mary was saying about that story about the village, the village life, there's, a person, and that's the trunk of the story, right? And she holds the village together. She is the tradition. So, and that is universal, I think. So,
And it's true that quite often I think about local stories. Like, some people might say, "Oh, this is too local. Who would be interested in this?" And I always say that even, I mean, you don't start with a global story. Like, start with your neighborhood, because something that is your closest to. And then you will, if you want to tell it, you will find this very universal element in it. That I mean, that there are only, I mean, all the universal elements are the same. So and that will make it become interesting to everybody.
I remember one time I saw a documentary film that happened somewhere in Siberia. Of every week they have one bread truck that comes in, and that the film followed the bread truck in a train coming into Siberia, and people are lining up getting the bread. And it's a very, very simple story like that. Why would I in Hong Kong be interested in a film like that? Is because we all understand the need to feed our family. You wait a long time, a week, for the bread truck to come in the middle of winter. And I think that's fascinating. So.
I really want to ask, what do you think is the most important character of the filmmaker in order to make an extraordinary film, especially documentary? Is it talent or training or experiences? I really want to know answer from masters like you guys.
Miracle. No, I honestly, I think that is a very curious question, because I don't think there's one character trait that makes you a great filmmaker. Yeah, it's a very strange question.
Well,
But, I think that it's. I mean, I don't think that you. I think you need talent, you need technique, you need experience, you need compassion, you need vision, but all of those things together, and you need conviction.
Life experience.
I mean, I always go back to this thing of sort of like, why are people letting themselves be filmed? And then why is someone asking a question? Like, you are asking that question because you have hope, that you want to be something and you want to know how, right? But I think the thing that's so fabulous about film is that there is every single different way to do it. And the thing that you have inside of you that is giving you this desire to do the thing, that's how you are going to become a filmmaker. So it may be that you're incredibly patient. It may be that you're incredibly intuitive. It may be that you're deeply curious. But like, whatever is the thing that is making you ask that question of like, how do I become that? That's how you're gonna do it. Because we each did it because of our own very weird set of reasons that we're sharing with you, and you can't duplicate them. it doesn't mean that you don't get to have your own road. You have your own road. It's just trying to figure out, listening to yourself, of understanding what is driving you. What is it?
I grew up with 3 brothers. They never allow me to say anything. So I have this desire to express myself ever since I was a little child.
And you do it very well, Nancy.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, okay. I want to share not a quite good experience about filmmaking. I'm a year 1 student of film and TV production.
I just want to hear who's talking.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, okay.
Just
I
talk
think
to-
a
just talk to
great
me.
director is I'm a friend of Christopher Nolan. He's a great, amazing director. The Dark Knight, this film is make me like to be a filmmaker. Yep. But there's some question is the message of I want to do this kind of this film, but not of people don't understand what the film talk about. Yeah. So but I'm trying to make this film, and I made it 3 months ago. I make a short film. It's about a Death Note. It is a Japanese cartoon animation story, and yeah, after I made it, I gave this film to my friend, my classmate, even my teacher. They just said, I don't understand. I just I see I saw it again, but I just don't understand. Yeah, for that moment, my heart said, "Oh my God, what?" Yep, I use the not of film language and the lighting and the shots, the different shots. I just want to say some social issue, some review points, to let them know, yeah, something happened in the society, but we ignore. So we should to care more about this issue.
But it didn't work.
Yeah.
It didn't work.
They just said, why you do it simply? Why your film say simply? Because it's hard to understand, but I just want to do my own way. But so for this moment, I have some question to, should I voice simply meaning of script, or I don't know. Yeah.
The first film that I made, nobody understood either. Yeah, and I like put my heart into it. I had a big crew. I spent a lot of time on it. I worked really, really hard on it, and I put my blood and guts into it. And everyone watched it, and they're like, and I think this is the biggest job that we have. It's like, how do we translate what's going on inside of us, and make it in a way that other people can understand. And you had the very painful experience, like my first experience of making something and it not quite working. And guess what? I did it again. The second film I made was a little more accessible, but then I said, okay, I'm going to make a feature film, and I worked for 2 years on it, and tons of people, and and then I edited for a really long time, and I realized at a certain point, like, I'm still not doing it. It doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense. And the thing is like, it's a language. It's a language that you learn. And we have this expectation that we can just sort of wake up, write a script, make a movie, and communicate everything that's inside of us. And it takes us a while to learn languages. We can all watch movies and say, I wish I had made that Christopher Nolan film. You know, like when I was young, I wished I had made Apocalypse Now. But that didn't mean in my first film I could make Apocalypse Now, right? You're learning a language, and one of the things you have to do is understand how to get feedback from people. So that when people tell you, I don't get this, you listen to that. And it doesn't mean they tell you, and I would love to hear Mary talk about this, but they'll give you feedback. They'll say, I don't understand it. Why don't you do it this way? It doesn't mean you do it that way. It just means you listen when they don't understand. And you're taking clues from when they don't understand. But you're developing your own language. You're learning the language of cinema. And people don't understand you yet. That makes sense. And it's a practice. It's a thing that you learn how to do. And sort of letting your ego go, like, don't be crushed. It's very painful, but like, and you put a lot of effort into it, but you learn some things. You actually learn some things, and the next time you will learn some more things, and you maybe will show it to a few more people before you go so far down the road. And you will learn how to take feedback. And that's a really, like, once you learn how to do that, Mary, I'm sure, can talk to us about feedback. Feedback is the story of Mary's life.
Yes, exactly. How did you know? Yeah, it's I can imagine that Stan Brakhage and Maya Deren would have had like a whole lifetime of not having people not understand their work. But yeah, it's very important how to take feedback. Is very, very difficult to learn, extremely difficult, because feedback in any case is very subjective. People would give you their opinion. And everybody, you have to remember that everybody looks at the film subjectively, even a most object or whatever, a film critic in a newspaper, he's looking at the film in a subjective way. So what a person says to you about not understanding your film does not mean that it doesn't reach somebody else, and I mean, I do listen to, I mean, we do have test screenings or whatever at each stage, and then we listen to feedback, but quite often I sort of caution young filmmakers to not show it to everybody at an early stage. I mean, like, then you get so confused about all the feedback coming at you that you are actually persuaded not to make your film. Sometimes it's not very important to have people not understand your film. You know, maybe you're not going out there to make a film for an audience of 10,000. Maybe you're out there to make a film for an audience of 2. If you reach those 2, that's good. So that is extremely important. But then again, it's like then when you are making a film commercially, it's very, very difficult how to shift through the feedback and take only the ones that apply, that you want to apply. Yeah.
I would advise filmmaker, it's important to set your goal. Is the film for theatrical release, or for online, or for TV, or for just a audience of two people, or for your own families? Because once you have that guidelines, you know how to make your film. Because it's the filmmaker. What do you want to say? How many people you want to reach? Is it for entertainment? Is it for a political film? Is it for a festival? Is it for just occasion? Is it for advocacy film? So I mean, those are the things you really have to decide when you make the film, because later on you know that that's your set of goals. I think a lot of people just make the film and figure out the distribution or figure out what the film is, the audience. Sometimes they find it very difficult because you find out that's really hard to please everybody.
Why don't we have 2 more questions? Okay.
I'm getting some water for a cougher in the audience. Does anyone else need some water?
My question's rather general, I suppose, and it's one that I'm fond of posing to professionals in all creative fields. And it's to relate with how people have this romantic sort of notion that some people have an underlying creative instinct and others don't. So have you seen that manifest in any different kinds of ways through all your years of experience, or do you not believe that it exists at all?
I think that's a very tough question because there is no one answer to that question. I've met people who are brilliant, who just, like Kirsten, who knows how to, work the camera, who have that basic instinct, okay? And how do you build that basic instinct is a lot of working on it, a lot of never giving up, just keep on working. So I think, there is maybe talent is overrated. I think a lot of it is really just, okay, Picasso is talented, okay? There aren't too many Picassos, okay? But I think in our industry, it requires so much of us, especially if you want to be a director, producer. You need to be able to raise money. You need to be able to write proposals, convince people of your idea. You need to be able to work with crew, who are very different personalities. You need to be able to meet someone who you never met before. In 10 minutes, you have to create that bond with that person so they will be able to reveal to you some of their stories. So it requires so much, and what Ruby was saying is life experience. And I think that life experience and understanding human nature is so important in our field.
I have a friend who's a camera person who's, I think, incredibly talented, but he's really, really strong-minded and always fights really strongly with the directors, so he never works a second time with the director. Like the difference between his career and mine is so stark. I've worked over and over and over again with directors because, it's like I'm fun to travel with, right? And then over time, I develop a vocabulary, a way of understanding with people, and I sort of keep working at it. But I always think of myself as an extremely slow learner, actually. Like it's taken me a really long time to understand what I'm doing, and yet people have given me the benefit of the doubt in many ways because it's fun to be together. We have a good time collaborating together. So I think there are like many ways to do it, but I think sometimes people with talent are challenging to work with, right? Because their sort of vision is so strong. So I think, I'm grateful for the people who have these sort of extraordinary talents that are there from the very beginning. But I think many of us have just stuck with it because we love the process, and then over time, it becomes something that we can do better than we did when we started.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, that I find that with each film, it's still giving me surprises. Each film that I edit, there are surprising moments, that sort of things that fall from the sky kind of thing. So I think that I do feel humbled by each experience of editing that I have, instead of like getting bigger and bigger. I'm getting smaller and smaller because there's so many things that still surprises.
I guess, you just look around. Sometimes you talk to people on the street or people at the wet market. I find that everything interests me because, you don't know what's the person. Everybody has a story. And it's from that story what you can make of. And I think really life experience is so important. And also curious about the arts because, movies is, well, it's about storytelling, it's about image making. So be curious in the arts, look at paintings, that's so important. Go to, installation, look at architecture books, arts books, all those things can inspire you, just one picture. And Kirsten just have a workshop, and she asked everybody to bring one picture and the creative clock. It was really interesting because from that two things, you're looking deep in yourself what you want in life, what kind of stories you want to tell. And so it's asking yourself what you want to make. So.
Okay, one more question.
I've been given the mic.
All right.
Okay, this question might be a bit on the nose for this group since it's Women Make Docs, but I wanted to take advantage of the four of your, I guess, perspectives in hindsight, and that is with there being more women in making documentaries, and in particular, I guess, more excluded voices in general in making documentaries and filmmaking. What do you think the biggest impact has been on the industry, like, or I guess maybe just like in the field itself? I would say industry, the field of like documentaries from the like continuing onrush of previously excluded voices.
I'm not going to answer. I'm just going to comment on what a lovely way to say it, excluded voices. I really like that. I think it's a good one. It's a good one. That voices that we wish to no longer exclude. But I like that as a start. Mary, I'm passing it to you.
What kind of impact is making? I can't really say because I can't measure right now what kind of impact. But that I can only celebrate the fact that there are more excluded voices in it. But I think that I always want to try to lump into the excluded voices not just women, but all the all the people that
All the excluded voices?
right.
Yeah.
Well, I think the more and more, because the equipment or it's so available, the tools are so available now. You can make basically not like 10 years ago. You have to get very expensive equipment. So everyone can make a film almost, but it's whether the film is going to be watched is another thing. And also you have the YouTube channel. Basically, if you want to make a film, it's not hard. So it's back to what you want to tell, what story you want to make. That's the question.
Based on my experience working with Muslim women in different communities, I think what I learned from them is that the strength of their community is very important. Their voice of that community, because the women in Indonesia, for example, they were very interested in microeconomy, whereas in Pakistan, they were more interested in helping women in the village who have no access to health resources, because women, if you don't have a man with you, you cannot go out of your house. So every community, they find their way of communicating the message and helping each other in getting their stories being told. And I think that is something that I learned from my experience of working with women in these communities. So, and that was for me I learned more from them than they learned from me, actually.
I mean, I'm going back to the experience of being at this Camera Image festival in Poland because, you know, I'm a big exaggerator. So like one time I'll say like, oh, it was 3,000 people, it was 5,000 people. I'm not sure how many people it was, but it was, you know, a theater probably 3 times as big as this. And it was kind of the history of cinema in terms of the cinematographers who were there. Like it was the great cinematographers. And on the one hand, I looked out there and I thought, you know, this is incredible. Like it was all of the great 70s filmmakers, all of those cinematographers were there. And, you know, Wong Kar-wai's cinematographer was there. Like all these people who were just like, oh, you've made the images that have changed my life, right? So it's a room full of the most incredibly sensitive, visionary white men you've ever seen, right? Like literally, like this is like, these were the most beautiful white men on the planet in a certain way. But it was all white European American men. And it's like, what would the world be if we could see movies, if you could look out into that crowd and it looked like this crowd, or look, you know, or look like a crowd in Senegal? Like, I just feel like, then we'd really be seeing movies. Then our minds would really be being blown because we'd be seeing all of these different perspectives. And I think that's what we're all hungry for when we go to the movies, of blow my mind. Like, you know, help me experience the world in a way I don't understand it. And if it's only top down, if it's only included people making movies, then what are we watching? So yes, more excluded voices and the end of exclusion would be as long as it's like crazy dreamers making the movies, that'd be great.
Could I just add a little bit something? Just that this reminds me of the fact that we are living in an age where women could be making more things, also because of technology and the way that we can work across the globe and, you know, all together at the same time, like you said, Kirsten, earlier, the collaborative effort, because that I'm just thinking of that right now. I'm editing a film as a Chinese woman in Paris. I'm editing a film with a producer in Sweden, and the director is a pregnant woman in Durban, South Africa, and we're doing this together. So this was something that wasn't possible before, like 20 years ago. So then let's treasure this moment.
All right, so let's give another round of applause to these 4 inspiring women filmmakers.